Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the Open Up Show. My name is Sivam Velaidam, and I am the president and founder at VoiceMen 360. VoiceMen 360 is a non-profit organization founded in 2020 in London, Ontario, Canada, dedicated to supporting men and boys through life challenges. We align with the International Men's Day movement and its six pillars, which promote the well-being of men and boys worldwide. Open Up creates a safe space, inclusive space for people from all walks of life to share their life journeys, challenges, and triumphs. The program airs Sundays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, featuring one guest per episode. Sometimes it depends on the individual, the guest time zone and everything we change. So that's why we have a morning show. So our guest is from South Africa, so that's why we changed the time. Before I introduce our special guest for today, I would like to review our disclaimer. Um, we would like to remind everyone that Voice of Men 360 is committed to promoting peaceful harmony in all of our interactions. The views and opinions shared by our speakers are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of Voice of Men 360. Please note that our content is not a substitute for professional, medical, or therapeutic advice. If you are struggling with personal challenges, we strongly encourage you to reach out to a qualified expert. For questions or concerns about today's episode or any of our content, feel free to email us at info at voiceomen360.org. Today, we have an amazing guest, Martin Pelders, founder of MatrixMen, author, keynote speaker, practitioner of narrative therapy, joining from South Africa. Welcome, Martin.
Sivam, thank you so much for the invite, and it's lovely to be here. Good evening
Absolutely,
from Africa.
absolutely. Yes, great to see you. And of course, it's as always good to connect with people like yourself. Thank
Thank you,
you
indeed.
for joining. Let's dive in the questions. Can you take us back to the movement? Um, you know, um, Matrix Men needed to exist. Can you take us back?
Yeah, so I got to a stage in my 40s where I realized that life wasn't too pleasant, and I couldn't figure out why. And it was purely a coincidence that I saw a show called The 200 Men on Oprah Winfrey back in the day, and it was a chap by the name of Tyler Perry who suggested that they do a show on male survivors. And I sat there listening to 200 Men in Chicago, here at the bottom end of Africa, and I was shocked because these men understood me so well. And they were talking about me, how I felt, how I thought, how I processed things, how I dealt with the world, and etc., etc. And it was an eye opener, and it was the first time in my 44 years that I'd heard somebody speaking about the fact that little boys could be sexually abused and raped as children. Up until that point, it was just the normal narrative, women and girls are the victims. Men are never victims; they're only perpetrated. So, hence began a healing journey. And after about 3 months, I started realizing that my childhood was not that great. It really wasn't. My first perpetrator of sexual abuse was, in fact, my mother. Several other men molested me, and then I got raped again at 12 by an older woman. And then from the age of 13 to the age of 19, I was ensnared and trapped by a chap who used me as his entertainment. So let's put it that way. But having dealt with all that, I realized that nobody talks about this. Nobody helps men. Where do we go? I tried a couple of psychotherapists, and They couldn't help me. In fact, they got scared when I told them that I'd been sexually abused as a child. It was almost like they didn't know what to do with me, you know. And I then, about 6 months after I started my recovery journey, I started to think about, okay, I need to start something to help other men in South Africa who have been through something similar. And you know, I had dreams of grandeur. I suppose I thought I'm going to start this organization, and hundreds of men are going to come and seek help and get counsel and all that sort of stuff. And that wasn't the case, you know. In fact, it took me about 3 months to get my first 3 men into the rooms, and it's grown from there. You know, the narrative is starting to change. People are starting to open up about this and talk about it, and we find that a lot more men are coming in to seek help and guidance now. So yeah, that's the need.
Right. So it's quite a bit of a journey that you have been to, and learning experiences. Of course, life throws in different situation, and then that's the way we mold at the same time that we can help other people, that they don't have to go through the same situation that we end up with it, right? So
Yeah.
it's pretty much is a turning point for you. At the same time, you want to convert into to helping other people, right?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, one thing that was important for me was also when I started MatrixMen is I wanted to make sure that my healing process wasn't done through other people. You know what I mean? I wasn't going to start this group and then try to heal whilst I was doing it. I wanted to make sure that I dealt with as much as I possibly could have before I started the groups. And you know, I didn't want them to kind of become my therapist at the end of the day. So I did a lot of work, intense work, before I actually started the groups and opened up. You know, I think it's quite harmful if you've not healed properly, and you start supporting other men. You can do a lot of harm. You really can.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. Because if we haven't, or if you cannot help yourself first, then it is very hard to help other people, right? So you have
Absolutely.
to heal first. You have to heal yourself, and then understand the life cycles or life experiences, life journey, and then so this way help other people, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, right. So you work with the male survivors of sexual abuse and rape. So what are some realities about their experiences that most people don't see or understand?
But most men, because society doesn't talk about it, because the narrative is it's only girls and it's only men that perpetrate and only girls that are the victims, a lot of men don't feel safe coming out to talk about these things. You know, I draw from my own experience where for years and years and years, I just kept quiet about it because, you know, I felt like a freak. I felt like I was the only person that this was happening to. So it took a long time for me to realize that I wasn't. In fact, in South Africa, I'm one of 44% of all boys. So that's the stats in this country, and according to research, that 44% of all boys had been sexually abused by the age of 18. So when you start realizing how prevalent it is and how little support is actually available for men who've suffered this, it becomes quite shocking. It really does.
Speaking about you know, sexual abuse and rape, of course, you said that there are not much supporting system. But can you share any support services, either any organizations, or how important is and then nowadays, or even individuals, groups, you know, how they can support? Can you?
Yeah. So in South Africa, we have MatrixMen. We used to have an organization called SAMSOSA, South African Male Survivors of Sexual Abuse, but the founder unfortunately moved to the UK. Then in Canada, there's the one I know of is called Men in Healing, which is based in Ottawa. In the States, you have one in six.org. You also have malesurvivor.org. Yeah, Samson in Australia. And these are all groups that run very effectively. And, we find that with men specifically, men like to work in groups. They like to heal together. Therapy one-on-one is it works, if you know what you're doing. But group therapy for men seems to be the ticket. And we get really good results. In fact, men literally do a 180 in life and completely change the way that they approach life and deal with things.
Right. So one thing is, of course, as you experience, or even yourself and other people too. One is people or the society, they don't realize or they don't have awareness about what men to get abused, or come across those situations, challenges. We don't have that much awareness in the
Yeah.
society. Generally speaking, across the board, like everywhere, right? So, how important is to understand and change our perspective at the same time in terms of the service system or the support system that we have to have more and more. Can you, elaborate? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, living in South Africa, we have a very unique perspective because, we are the rape capital of the world. We are the sexual abuse capital of the world. We are the GBV capital of the world. We are the human trafficking capital of the world. So when it comes to like all the bad things, I mean, I was looking the other day, 6 of our cities, our major cities in South Africa, are in the top 50 most dangerous cities in the world. We have a murder rate of between 64 and 70 people per day. 14 women per day are being killed. And, you got to look at this and you got to go like, I keep saying this one thing. It's been my mantra since 2025 when I do talks and corporate gigs and things like that. I always say to people, if men are the problem, why are we not fixing men? And, why do men end up doing these things? Why do we make up 92% of the prison population? Why do we make up 75% of suicides? Why do we make up 80 odd percent of addicts and severe addiction? So clearly there's a problem, and people keep saying, well, violence on women is perpetrated mainly by men. And I'm going, well, yes, that's fine because that's been researched and that is evidence there. But likewise, violence on men by women, nobody talks about. So we need to look at all of these things and stop trying to genderize this. But I think we've been polarized in terms of the way that we approach things and look at them. We've been taught that we protect the feminine, we support the feminine, and men must just work it out, But I love research. I knew very early on when I went into this that I would need to base everything on scientific evidence and be able to back up my arguments because it is a very emotive subject, especially when you're talking to people who are radical feminists. And, I don't want to anger them. I just want to get them to think differently. And, so one of the studies I quote regularly, it was found that boys who were sexually abused as children or raped as children are 4 times more likely to perpetrate a rape. Now, when we look at the incredibly high stats, I mean, it's something like 36% of all children in South Africa, boys and girls, will have suffered sexual abuse by the age of 16. And if we're looking at that and we look at the facilities available to women and to men, by far the majority of facilities are made up for women and only catered to women, etc. And I believe in South Africa there are 16 facilities that claim to support men. There is one that actually does. That's MatrixMen, right? Now, if you take the fact that so many boys are sexually abused in this country, I mean, it's got to break down to about 1.2, 1.8. In a population of 60 million, we're looking at yearly 10% of boys. So they make up 7 million, so 3.5 million boys aged under 18. So of that 3.5, 10%, that's 350,000 boys per year will be sexually abused in this country. And if they are 4 times more likely to perpetrate, then we kind of have to put this together and say, okay, I see how we have such incredibly high rape stats in this country because these boys aren't getting the support they need. They're not getting the therapy they need to break that intervention that just breaks the cycle, right? So they feel unheard, they feel unseen, and they just feel like, well, they did it to me, I'll do it to them. But then we look at GBV as well. So what are the 5 really big coping mechanisms that men are given in the world? We're not allowed to feel when we're growing up. We're told not to cry when we hurt ourselves. We're told not to be emotional. So we're given 5 emotional outlets. So it's sex, silence, sports, addiction, and anger. So anger to me, I was having a discussion with somebody the other day, and they said, well, gender-based violence is all about power. And I said, it's not about power, it's about fear. And they looked at me as if I was crazy. And I said, you know what? If I'm a man with incredibly low self-esteem because I've grown up in an environment where I was emotionally abused, verbally abused, mentally abused, sexually abused, physically, whatever the case may be, right? I don't have the ability or the confidence to go out and get a girlfriend. I don't feel entitled to or good enough to be able to do that sort of thing. So what I do is when I finally snag this lady, whom I do desperately love and care for, I then start trying to control her. Out of fear of losing her, then I will financially control her, coercively control her. And eventually, if things get bad, if I grew up in an environment where abuse was the way to deal with things, then of course, abuse is on the table. Then I will start abusing this woman and manipulating her to keep her. So I think we need to change the narrative. And I really think we need to look at the fact that GBV happens not because of power, but because of fear. Men with low self-esteem do silly things. They really do. And if they feel that they're going to lose this bubble of safety that they've created, they will resort to the weirdest things. And the funny thing is, women do the same thing. You get into environments where women coercively control and financially control and physically abuse and all that sort of stuff. I mean, the numbers coming out of the UK at the moment, we're looking at about 40% of all men have suffered abuse. The States, we're kind of looking at about the same numbers. So, yeah, there's a lot in that, and there's a lot that we need to start addressing in terms of the narrative that we used to talking about.
Absolutely. The reality is across the board, like all over the world, it's so devastating that you see the number, you see the data, the statics and everything. It's real. The problem is that instead of helping or supporting or providing some sort of services, keep ignoring men or their vulnerability, and also portrayed, especially media, in a negative way. So instead of looking into helping, supporting how we can heal these boys and men, young men, right? Because down the road, we don't know how they're going to turn to, right? So it is very, very important, as you said. It's of course. It's not, we don't have enough data to back up, but still we have some. We need to have more data. At the same time, we need to have more people to support or start some sort of services, because we don't want to wait for government or what, they will do it, or some sort of organization, they will do it. Like yourself, for a very good example, people, individual, they can start their own a supporting group or something like that to help them, right? Otherwise, it's going to be a disaster. It's already been, a lot of men are struggling all over the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you often say, if men feel safe, they talk. What actually helps men feel safe enough to open up?
Well, men. I mean, we've been the targets for the longest time, isn't it? So men are toxic masculinity, and men are trash. TikTok, there's this thing now, it's all men must die. And I'm going like, well, who's going to fix your toilets if all men are dead? Who's going to fix your cars? We need to think this through. But and these are knee-jerk reactions to really silly. I always say, people go and say all men. That's in their universe, right? So if I've grown up as a child and my father was abusive and my brother was abusive, and then my father's friends were abusive, and of course in my little world, then all men are abusive. But that's not true of everybody, and we're doing our daughters a ginormous disservice because they grow up in fear. So they automatically just fear all men, and they can't enjoy and live life. I mean, really, it's very traumatic for them, I believe. So, yeah, I've lost track. I talk too much. And to think about the question again. So, but we need to create safe spaces. Here we go. Okay, I'm back on track. Right. So what makes men feel safe? It's just an environment where they'll come and they'll say something. They'll go, hey, last week I did this, I heard this and this, or something happened to me or whatever. And that will be like a tester. It'll be a space where he'll throw out, it's like fishing. So you'll throw out the bait and he comes back next week and he's not had any feedback from someone else, so he goes, okay, that's cool. Let me try a bigger one. So, hey, I'm struggling with alcohol addiction. Okay, and you support the guy. And as long as that information doesn't get back via his wife or via a friend, hey, I heard you're struggling, then we build these safe spaces. And I like to build them in a particular way. I always say there's something about men and fire, especially in Africa. Fire is a very powerful hypnotic tool. And, we do something in South Africa called braaiing, or you'd call it barbecuing, but we do it with real wood and real fire and real meat, by the way. So we braai and barbecue a lot, and fire is just a hypnotic thing. So when you get a bunch of men around a fire and they just sit staring at the flames with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or juice or whatever, we try and keep alcohol out of the equation because, people get silly with that. They start opening up, and once they start opening up and they feel safe and the feedback doesn't come back from other people outside of the group, then they feel safer and they will start talking about bigger and better things. But it also depends on the leader. I think the leader is the guy that needs to be the most vulnerable. The masculine ideal is that we're not vulnerable. We don't talk about these things. We just suck it up, we keep quiet, and we move on. We deal with it. We just suppress it, and we move on. So if you have a leader in a group who is sensitive and vulnerable, when he goes, yeah, you know what, I struggle with porn addiction, man. There's just sometimes, especially when my wife irritates me and I get worked up about it. I mean, that tendency, that need to go and just check it out. And when you're vulnerable like it and you open, that gives other men permission to be vulnerable. And, I go through my life and I go, what, abused from the age of 5 to 19. I was set up by my mom mainly to be a victim. When I got married, I married somebody just like my mother, a narcissist, who it was all about her, man. You had to make her look good. You had to make her, and that's reasonable. And when you start sharing these things, like my wife used to smack me through the face and kick me in the nuts, and you say, guys, it happens, and because I was raised by my father, who said to me, you don't hit a woman, I never retaliated, So I sucked up all the punishment that she dished out and kept quiet about it. Does it mean I was weak? No, it doesn't. It just means I was doing what I was told to do, not hit a woman. And once you have a vulnerable leader who kind of talks about these things and opens up, then it gives, I always say this. I tell my story, and in South Africa, I've told my story internationally. I've told it, when somebody says, how many people have you told your story? I go, probably running in a couple of million now, So I've been in newspaper, on TV, on radio, and internationally. I had my story in a Dutch newspaper. I've been on American podcasts. I've been on English podcasts. So and Australian ones. So it's out there, And I think when I've always said this, I will use my story to give other men permission to tell their stories. And this is where I love the narrative approach. And I've always had this idea, right? Is that healing begins when you have the authority or the ability to tell your story. And who says that? I think it's Gabor Mate who says that as well. He's also a Canadian, right? So Gabor says, he says, what happened to you is not the trauma, it's the inability to be able to talk about that becomes the trauma. And he's spot on, you know what I mean? The abuse was the abuse. If somebody punches you in the eye, it heals, you get better, you live through those things. But the fact that you can't talk to people about it is what causes the real trauma. So this is, to me, what safe spaces for men look like. Create an environment that is comfortable for men, firstly, right? So the fire, that sort of stuff. And then have a vulnerable leader who's prepared to put himself out there just a little bit. And that will encourage men to start talking and coming out.
Yes, because the safe space and also permission. A lot of people they wait for permission, or what? It's sometimes intentionally or without intention. They don't know or they don't aware of that. They wait forever, or sometimes somebody push them, and then they can speak up. But like you said, it's we need to create more spaces at the same time,
Okay.
safe spaces. The thing is that, of course, men just simply they don't open up and then talk about personal stories or personal emotional challenges, but
Yeah.
we want to give them space. So just to give permission to share, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Sivam, the weirdest thing is that once men start talking,
mhm.
all the other guys realize, hey, I'm not in this. I'm not the only one that's going through this. Like
Exactly.
this dude's going through it as well. And then it opens up, man. Then they start talking. When I start telling my divorce story, man, every single time somebody will come out with something, then it becomes like a competition. Who's got the worst divorce story? And it's and guys go at it. But you know what? Again, once they've spoken about it, they feel this huge relief. It's like, wow, finally I've been able to tell that story. I've been dying to tell it. So yeah, it's powerful. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's okay, because it's a nice way to put it. Because thing is like it's kind of like a sports, like we want to play it, and then you're waiting for somebody else. Okay, you know what? As soon as somebody opens the mouth, and then everybody else is started once they start, and then share because they have a lot of stories to share. Because so many times or so many places or so many. Um, they didn't have a space to share. So uh, once they found the space, they started to share. um,
Mm.
right. So early on, you decided groundwork in science. Why was that so important, and how has it changed the way your message is received?
Yeah. You know what? Today, it's amazing the resources that we have available to us. I mean, neuroscience is exposing so many things about the way people think. And then we just have research that comes in. For instance, in South Africa, where I discovered that 44% more boys than girls suffer sexual abuse in this country. And nobody believes that, and you need scientific evidence to back that up. You can't go in and make a statement and go, yeah, but more boys suffer sexual abuse than girls. I was doing a talk at a very exclusive girls' school here in South Africa. And I said to them, who suffers sexual abuse at higher rates, boys or girls? And I say, hey, who votes girls? And they all put up their hands. And I say, who votes boys? Nobody puts up their hands. And I said, well, you guys are all wrong, And then they're shocked, They look at you and they go like, what? Now, the narrative that we've been given has always been, well, girls, 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 girls. And now this guy's coming along and he's saying, no, actually, it's boys. And then I say, and I always give that question, I say, you know, what support is available for boys? And they go like, well, we don't know of any. And I go, no, you do. You know of one organization, mine, right? So we can refer men to that. And then there was one girl who said, no, boys, she thinks it's boys. And I said, why? And she said, well, she's got a friend who came and spoke to her about it. So she opened up, or at least her friend opened, her guy friend opened up to her. So when you start talking to people and you challenging the narrative, right, that predominant, that prevailing narrative, you need to have science backing you up. You need to have something that says, listen, I'm not making this up. This is fact, right? So let's look at it and let's talk about it. Let's open the discussion up, right? And you can't just go into a society that has been so conditioned to believe a certain narrative. Like it's for instance in the UK and Australia and all those, you know, in the UK, it's still boys still can't be raped by women, right? In 2026, it's still legally impossible for a woman to rape a boy, even though it's happening, right? It happens, and it happens a lot. In fact, the perpetrators on you know, again, you know, in South Africa, we have the worst records for everything, but it gives us insight, and we've done the research, right, into the fact that the perpetrators of sexual abuse on boys are majority women, right? Again, a narrative that society just doesn't want to hear. Women are nurturing, loving, and caring. Men are the bad ones that hurt people, right? But then you go in and you say, no, actually, you know, the people that hurt boys the most are, in fact, women. Then you go to a country like the UK where they go like, well, actually, legally, you know, a woman can't rape a boy, even though she forces penetration or she forces or whatever. Legally, it doesn't happen. So now you go, but, you know, more men. You're going, yes, well, more men because it's legally impossible for a woman to rape. And again, in certain states in Australia, it's legally impossible for a woman to rape a boy. And the states, I must still do the research on the states and Canada and those places. But now you need evidence. You have to be able to back up what you're saying scientifically. Otherwise, people will shred you. They will absolutely decimate you. And I have these discussions all the time. I want to say, discussion is a nice word, right? It's more like arguments, right? Because people come and they go, no, more men, more men, more men. And I'm going, but where's the evidence that women do this sort of thing? There is none. There is no research, or there is very little research that has been conducted into the other side of the story. So you can't come in with this sweeping statement and say, well, it's all men, when we don't know what the opposite is, right? So we need to start getting that. And I'm a big one. I'm a big one for research. And in fact, one of the things, you know, for instance, let's take Epstein, right? I mean, Virginia Giuffre, who's, I think that's how you pronounce the name, went in and one of the early court cases, her lawyer said that Epstein and his cohorts are guilty of the human trafficking of boys and girls. She didn't say just girls. She said boys and girls, right? Then we start going through the emails and we start seeing this thing, well, why don't you get me a masseuse? And the masseuse is a term for a boy, right? So there were a lot of boys that were being trafficked by Epstein as well, but do we hear about it? Nothing, right? So what happens to those victims? They're silenced. They are absolutely silenced because it's all about. Now, what happens to somebody who's silenced? He gets angry. And what happens to somebody who's angry? He starts beating people, murdering people. I mean, in the extreme, right? For instance, another one that I quote a lot is, in fact, my brother-in-law, and he did research into 13 serial killers in South Africa. So he's probably one of the leading experts on serial killers in the world today. And I went through his research and read his book. It's called Killer Stories. Amazing if you're into true crime, fantastic book to read. And I read each one of them, and every single one of those 13 serial killers had something in common, right? Broken families, so either a not present father or an emotionally unavailable father, and a broken mother, an abusive mother. And they all became, well, all 13 of them are serial killers. So there's got to be something in there, you know? And I keep saying that the worst case scenario of children who grow up in abusive homes are serial killers, right? The best case scenario is an addict like myself. I was an addict from the age of 13 to the age of 42. And why? Because I needed to numb the pain of all the stuff that had happened to me. I didn't have anywhere to talk about it. It was just, addiction was a tablet that I took to numb that pain. So science is it's vital, because we are challenging the prevailing narrative, the dominant narrative, and we're saying to them, listen, the discourse is wrong. The discourse is wrong. And in order to prove that, we have to have good scientific evidence. And so that's
Absolutely. I mean, the data research are very, very important because not only backing up, but at the same time to study what's going on, to get to know what's going on in the world around us. Maybe those people in and around in the community or in the country somewhere, but it's happening in real time, right?
Yeah, no,
We are
absolutely.
speaking as we are speaking, somewhere, somehow in other part of the world, something happens to some boys. We don't know, right? So somebody has to go through those life challenges. So we don't know, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, it's because the data, the research will help us to build or create some more maybe come up with the new initiatives to help those people, those men, especially, right? Everyone
Yeah.
has their own journey, own trauma and everything, but at the same time, we cannot just blame. We need to find a way to heal them, support them, right?
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
how do you fix a problem when you don't understand it? And this is where research comes in, but it needs to be good research as well. I mean, you get bad research. I mean, for instance, there was an organization here who was going to do research into sexual abuse of boys and girls, and their purpose was to disprove an earlier study. And I'm going like, why do you want to do that? I mean, why don't you go in and actually examine whether that study was right? Because if that study was correct, then that's a mind-blowing situation, right? So, credible research is something, and I find a lot of people come at it from a skewed perspective. It's from a feminist kind of thing, And I mean, there's an organization that I'm not going to mention who claims to support men and boys, and all their research is done from a skewed. And I watch this. The minute you hear an organization, we did research into why men hurt women, and I'm going like, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. When you going in and you're looking at why women are the victims of something, then you're not caring for the men, right? So don't claim to care for men when you actually trying to support women and a feminist. I mean, people, don't get me wrong. You know what I mean? I am an egalitarian. I believe in equity. I believe in equality. Absolutely 100%. But what we've seen in the feminist movement today has nothing to do with equality, with equity. It's so far away from what it should be. It's not even funny, So it's actually more harmful than what it's doing good right now. And the funny thing is, it's backfiring. It's kind of hurting the woman more than it is the men right now, which is the weirdest thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of misinterpretation and misunderstanding is so much going on in the feminism world. So let's talk about your book, The Pumpkin Van. Tells the stories of moving from victim to healing. What does that journey usually look like in real life? Talk about the book. Why do you want to write, and what kind of message you want to convey? Things like that.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I poured my heart and soul into this book over 12. It took me 12 years to write it. It was a process, I must tell you. And a lot of people will read it. People who know me, and they'll phone me and they go like, you know what? I thought you'd tell some stories, but I did not think you would be that open and honest about it. So it's raw. It's real. You know what I mean? It's my life and the life of 6, 7 other men around the world. One is a triple murderer. I kind of detail a bit of his life. One is a guy from Australia who detailed a lot of work in his life, and then a few others. I tried to do one on a guy in the States, but when he started sending me dirty pictures, I was like, no, dude, I'm out. Let's leave it. So, but yeah, the story, for me, as I say, for me, healing is the thing, and there's this narrative in the sexual abuse recovery circles that once this has happened to you, it's going to impact you for the rest of your life. And I'm sorry, you know what? Neuroscience tells us, what's that famous quote? I think it was Henry Ford who said, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And absolutely. And it's the same thing with healing. If you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Healing is a choice, and we need to do it. And so in my book, I don't just talk about the abuse. I don't just talk about the bad stuff that happens to people. I kind of highlight science. I highlight neuroscience. I highlight the studies that, in fact, I believe around the world that boys and girls are being sexually abused at about equal rates. I don't think South Africa is that unique, that it's the only country in the world where this is happening. I know from things like India, a lot of female perpetrated sexual abuse on boys in India. I mean, I had that in my very early days of MatrixMen. A lot of Indian people would connect with me and start talking about specifically familial. So in other words, sisters, aunties, mothers, stepmothers, that sort of stuff. Throughout Africa, I know from Kenya, a lot of people contact me and talk about that. So it's a very important thing for me is highlighting also the female perpetrated sexual abuse. Because I keep saying we don't talk about these things, so it keeps people trapped, right? So what about women who've been sexually abused by women? What happens to them? Where do they go for healing? Where do they go for help? Because nobody talks about it, right? So we keep them trapped in this victim mentality, saying like, there's something wrong with you. It only happened to you. It doesn't happen to anybody else in society. And children do that. They shut down. They become addicts. They become suicidal. They become, they start. I mean, I have one chappie who's has DID, so dissociative identity disorder, or what we used to call multiple personality disorders. And this is what he does to deal with the pain of not having been able to talk about it. So in the book, I cover a lot of these sorts of stories, but the overriding narrative in the book is always, you can heal. It is a choice. Make that choice. I encourage you, please make that choice. So that's essentially what the book's about.
Yeah, I just displayed the book link on Amazon, so you people can go and get it. It is very important. Not only data or research and statistics, but at the same time, books like this, it's very much important, so people can read it and then understand. So they can change their perspectives and looking at things from different angle, right? It is very important. You are leading a voice on adverse childhood experiences, ACE. How do childhood wounds show up later in men's adult lives, Martin?
Yeah. I love the research being done into, and it's ongoing. It's been going for 35, 40 years now, which is fantastic, right? So we have really long-term data that is coming out on adverse childhood experiences. And the initial one was that they were looking at how adverse childhood experiences impacts on your physical health, right? So what are the adverse childhood experiences? So it would be things like growing up in poverty, growing up in violent neighborhoods, violent homes, growing up in mentally abusive homes, verbally abusive homes, sexually abusive homes, physically abusive homes, emotionally abusive homes, growing in a home where one or more of your parents or siblings had a mental illness or was incarcerated. So there's 10 major areas. And they're finding that if people have experienced 3 or more of these adverse childhood experiences, that your propensity to ischemic heart disease goes up 100, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but they're very high, 100 and something percent, 60, 170, around about percent. Your propensity to developing cancers goes up 220 odd percent. Depression goes up 460 something percent. Suicidality 1,400%. Now we start looking at all these diseases that are going, these diseases that, besides the food and the chemicals and the additives and the plastics and all that sort of stuff, you tend to make more bad choices. So food becomes a soother, and then we eat a high sugar diet, and we end up with diabetes, and we end up with all these sorts of things. So that was the basis. That's where they started. But then they started finding out that like 98% of all children who have been diagnosed with ADHD are not actually clinically diagnosable as ADHD, 100%, right? And then they started drawing this back to the adverse childhood experiences. And again, like a very high proportion of kids that display the traits of ADHD and all that sort of stuff have in fact suffered 3 or more abuses. So for me, it's an indicator to how people were treated as children. So if somebody's got severe ADHD, it's possible that it is actually a clinical diagnosis that is available, but only 2% of the time. So drugs and things help in those situations. But also it shows up at work. If you're in the office and you have this person who sits in the corner and he's quiet and he doesn't interfere, doesn't talk, he just comes in, does his work, goes and leaves. At the end of the day, he just walks out, doesn't say goodbye to anybody. There's a good chance, we call him an introvert, or her an introvert, but chances are they might be fearful. You get guys with PTSD, for instance, and they become the office joke. Everybody's like, bang, make a big noise. Oh, laugh at him whilst he jumps, That's severe trauma. We need to talk about these things. You get the guy who throws his toys out of the cot when people don't listen to him. He starts throwing a tantrum like a 13-year-old. Meantime, he's 50. Boils down to childhood trauma, right? The guy who goes to the office, when I was growing up in the corporate world, growing up when I was first in the corporate world, we would have a Friday night, would be pub night. Boy, the company goes out, buys booze, Friday night, we all get together, goes wild. And now you get guys there's 2 different types of people, right? There's 2. The one type is somebody who will have a drink or 2 and then say, thank you very much, that's enough, right? Then there's the other type who starts and can't stop. So the only time he stops is when he can't walk anymore, right? Again, couple that to childhood trauma. So if you get the guy who's like throws his toys out of the cot and gets pissed every Friday night at the office function, I put them together and I go like, okay, chances are pretty good that you suffered pretty dramatic trauma. So these are the things that, our first 7 years of life are kind of the grounding that we have to become adults. And if that first 7 years is tragic and is filled with trauma, in other words, we grow up in what we call the limbic system. So what is the limbic system? It's what we call the primal brain, fight, flight, freeze. If we grow up as children wedged in that limbic system because we are not safe in the environment that we're in, we're having to constantly outthink, outsmart, outmaneuver. It's like a game of Survivor. Just to grow up as a child, you grow up in that limbic system. So, and if you look at what happens when you grow up in the limbic system, it constantly pumps adrenaline into your system. You're constantly on the hyper alert, ready to fight, to flight, to run away, to freeze, or whatever the case may be. And it's just bad. Your heart rate is elevated, so you end up with blood pressure issues, and it's just the impact on your body in terms of adverse childhood experiences is severe. Ideally, if I grew up in Africa, right? I have never walked around a tree and walked into a lion in Africa. We have a lot of them, right? But imagine if the lion is not something that we encounter in the bush once in a lifetime, maybe, but the lion is actually somebody that lives in our home. And we're constantly on hyper alert, avoiding that lion in the home, always scared, I do it. Today, I've done a lot of work on myself, right? And I've got a 5-year-old son now. And sometimes I get angry and I shout at him and I look at those little eyes and I go, oh, man, I've done it, I've chased him into that limbic system. He's scared of me right now. and that's tragic, you know. So like I have to calm down, walk away, calm down, come back, pick him up, give him a big hug, and say, my boy, no matter what, Daddy will never hurt you. I love you, you know. And it's scary. It's and the problem with this is that is what I was taught. That was my survival mechanism, my coping mechanism, and I put that onto my children. And but I can stop it, and I need to do the work to be able to stop that.
Absolutely. And I'm not sure how many people are aware of the childhood wounds, show up in a later life, especially men, young men, adult men too, right? So it is
Mm.
very important to at least looking into these things and get to know, right?
Yeah.
Um, in that case, like your voice is very important, Martin. That your work is so important. So, how does narrative therapy and storytelling help men make sense of their pain?
You know, the nice thing about telling stories, especially when you're a group of men, right, is that I'll tell my story and somebody will, and it's not like it's a competition. You know what I mean? It's just somebody will hear it and they go like, oh, crap. Now, I've seen this over and over again, right? Somebody tells a story and goes, well, this is what happened to me. And we don't allow, especially when it comes to sexual abuse, I don't allow major details. I go like, you know what, you can give us the gist. We understand why you're here. You don't have to give us gory details. And if people do, and that, you know, that's something I'm very firm on. If somebody keeps crossing that boundary, I kick them out of the group, because they're there for nefarious means. They because they get off on it, kind of thing. So I don't allow that sort of thing. But when you're in a group environment and somebody says, you know, let's take marriage for instance, right? So my ex used to do things like she would buy me a present, right? Now, being a narcissist, that's her way of showing love. She doesn't have the ability to say, I love you, so she buys you a gift. Now, she's gone into her little stash of money and she's bought you this watch. And this is a true story, right? She bought me this beautiful Michael Kors watch. Oh, I treasured that thing. It was beautiful. I watched, I protected it, you know. And one day I was working on the pool and I took it off and I put it down next to the weir at the pool, right? There was nobody home. It was just me, my ex, and my daughter. My daughter would not, I know, in a million years, wouldn't have taken that. She was like 5, so she understood. Leave the watch, you know. And I was working down at I had a heat pump on the pool, and I was sorting out the filter and everything. And I came back and I looked down, and the watch was gone. And I thought to myself, well, okay, my wife probably came out, saw it there, and wanted to keep it safe. Picked it up, took it inside. So I carried on doing my things around the house and whatever. In the evening, dinner time, I said to her, honey, you got my watch, you know, where's my watch? She goes, I don't have your watch. I like, but, you know, I put it down there. I know I put it down there, and suddenly it was gone. Did you not take it? No, I didn't take it. Yeah, you lost it again. And she said off at me like I was the worst person in the world, you know. So now when I tell stories like that, other guys listen, right? And then they go like, geez, my ex used to do things like that to me. You know, wow. You know, it's, and then I also I relate stories like if you're in a relationship and somebody just starts accusing you of stuff without evidence, without a shred of foundation, hey, you having an affair, you cheating on me, you know, that sort of stuff. My first response nowadays is always to say to the guys, check her out, because that's what's spinning around in her head. I'm having an affair, so he must be doing the same thing, right? And and you discover all these things, and it just becomes nice for men to be able to share those stories, because we find similarities and we find camaraderie in those stories, and we support one another, you know, give people ideas. I was again, I don't have all the answers, but I've been through a lot. And if you listen to my stories, you'll probably find you in there somewhere, right? And the longer we talk about it, the more you're going to see, well, hang on a second, you know, and you're going to start making more informed choices about your life simply because you heard somebody else's story. And it's my life is centered around narrative therapy, because if it wasn't for Tyler Perry and the 200 Men show, I would never have known about the fact that men can be victims of sexual abuse. I would never have known that, you know, specifically when it comes to perpetration by women. And that is all because people told their stories, found the courage to tell their stories. And if we keep telling our stories, it gives so many more people permission to begin their healing journeys, to come out and seek help and guidance and all that sort of stuff. So it's vital. Yeah, it's a beautiful way to do it.
Absolutely. And also, you're giving, earlier you said, giving a permission to other people too, right, to share. Um, so it's not you are healing yourself at the same time. The other people, they started to see, connect with their story, their own story at the same time with your story. Or you know what, I'm not alone, and it's actually giving them some sort of hope, so they can come out from their circle or surroundings, environment, and see things, looking at things from a different aspect, so they can understand more. They can
Yeah.
feel free to share.
Mm.
I have a few more questions, but I just want to have a couple of announcements, and then I will come back to you. Okay,
Cool.
say there. So people, I have what do you call, a couple of announcements. Today you are watching Open Up a Show. Usually we air it on Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And then Willie is in a Tamil live talk show that's in Tamil language. That's in on Sundays at the same time. I mean, sorry, 8 a.m. Eastern Time in the morning. We run a men's group meeting, only for men by men, second Saturday of every month from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time through Zoom. No recordings. Um, so there are no limitations on gender, age, nationality, or ethnicity. People from all walks of life can participate in any of our shows. If you like to be a guest on any of our shows, or are interested in joining our organization to help us directly or indirectly, please reach out to us. We would love to work with the individuals, professionals, experts, community organizations, associations, corporations, government officials, and businesses. Our phone number is 226 289 8784. Email address info@voiceomen360.org. Website www.voiceomen360.org. Um, we have a Facebook page and group, Voice of Men 360. Please join us. And other social media platforms: Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. On YouTube, we have absolutely, we have our YouTube channel. You can subscribe. Please help us to reach more people. So this way we can serve more people. So coming back to you, Martin. So let's talk about your uh, life journey story, which is after 13 years in this space. What patterns do you keep seeing in men who begin to heal?
A heal. Men, yeah. I think the worst pattern is that men are still afraid, even though they hear stories of other people, they're still afraid to come out and heal. That's the saddest thing, you know. But the healing part is, uh, it's like men become a totally different person. It's just unbelievable. I've seen men who not just mentally change, but physically change as well, and that to me is the most amazing thing. And we run a program. It's like a 20-week program, and we meet every week and we go through a set thing. And it comes a time where the guys will walk into the room and you'll just see that their faces have lit up and their eyes are sparkly and they're smiling. And I look at them and smile and go like, "Man, you got it this week." And they'll go like, "No, I got it this week." It's and it's a treacherous journey. I mean, the first 10, 11 weeks, no, not quite. I think 9 weeks. The first 9 weeks are punishing. They're really painful. And the guys are having to deal with a lot. They're really going through treacherous times, recovering memories and reliving experiences. And it's very difficult. And sometimes they think, man, I'm worse off now than I was when I started. I mean, I shouldn't have spoken about this. I shouldn't have come out. But we encourage them to stay, and if they do, you get to that 10th week where suddenly this physical change happens. And I've had guys that have gone from being addicts to being clean, sober, happy, leading incredible lives, getting promoted. One guy was on the verge of losing everything: his wife, his house, his job. This poor guy had slept with everybody in his company, just every woman in his company. He just could not get enough sex because that was his way of proving his masculinity, because he was raped by a boy as a child. And it's just amazing to see how his life is completely transformed. He's made up with his wife. He has a very high position in a large bank, and he runs the division for Africa. So he has a very stressful, high-powered job, and he still takes the time to drop his daughters off to school and pick them up from school and make them lunch and spend time with them during the day. And so these are the kinds of changes. Men who've harbored a lot of anger and hatred and pain have changed and suddenly become soft. And some people who haven't seen him for many years will come and say, "Wow, you're like somebody else. Who are you?" So healing it's an amazing journey, and I love seeing that transformation and seeing how these men do recover and become completely different humans.
I can sense that. I can hear what you are saying, because the thing is like so many times they were in a kind of a shell, and then they don't know how to come out, and suddenly or gradually they come out and then see themselves in a different space. So it is a amazing journey. At the same time, it's they feel free, I would say. So they can do more. They can be more productive, I would say, right?
Oh yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So what has this work taught you about masculinity that you didn't understand before, Martin?
Well, masculinity it's a tough beast to define, isn't it? But often people will say, "Well, what is masculinity?" And I say, "Okay, who's a bigger man? Who's a man's man for you? Is it The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, or is it Kipchoge?" And they all look at me and they go like, "Huh?" And I go, Kipchoge is the guy who almost broke the 2-hour marathon, right? So that means that this little man who's like this thin and this tall, right, very short, ran 42 kilometers at an average pace of 21 kilometers an hour. I mean, that's. Then you get this other dude, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who can bench press me and my family probably, but who's the bigger man, right? And I go like, I said like, Dwayne would never be able to run a 42K 2-hour marathon, but Kipchoge also can't bench press 50 kilos, So so what is masculinity? Masculinity is legacy. It's identity. To me, everybody needs to kind of work out their own form of masculinity, but it always boils down to the. So I have, I work a lot in the Christian space. So I always break it down to these three, right? So they are protectors, providers, and priests. So when you take the priest aspect, it's a teacher, somebody who teaches his family, his children, shows them the right way to do things. What is the protector? It's not a guy that stands at the entrance to the house with a gun. There's more to protection. You protect your daughters from bad people, from bad boyfriends. You protect your sons from bad girlfriends. You protect your wife from bad things that happen around the house. And you protect them in that you provide a safe space for them to live in, right? You protect them in that you give them the tools, the education, and the wisdom to make the right choices. To provide for them, it's not just a financial thing. You provide the education, you provide the food, you provide the safe environment, you provide all these things. So break it down to the 3 Ps and that kind of, to me. So if you can raise children that don't turn out as badly as you did or turn out better than you did, take it from whence it comes. But I mean, had I not gone through the healing process, my children would have been completely different, right? My grandchildren would have been completely different. But because I went through that healing process when my daughter was about 13, she was able to see the transformation in me, right? So, wow, dad's no longer this angry man that drinks his problems away, right? Dad is calmer. Dad is more loving. Dad is more understanding. That is a safe space that I can go to when I'm struggling with things, right? I mean, she still made mistakes. I mean, poor girl fell pregnant before she had a boyfriend that, yeah, and then ran away. So great, So the first person she came and told was like, Dad, I want to tell you something. And before she could say anything, I looked at her and smiled and said, "Where's the baby due?" And she said, "How do you know?" I said, "You're my baby. I know you. I understand you. And I know when you have a certain way of delivering bad news, and that is the, but it's not bad news. It's so I'm going to be a grandpa. Stuff happens. Let's fix it. Let's move on. So these are the things. It's to me, there is no toxic masculinity. There's just hurt men who don't know how to interact with the world. So they use the anger, the 5 that I've told you about, right? The sex, the silence, the sports, the anger and addiction. And those are the tools that they've been given all their lives. We've been told, don't cry, don't be such a baby, you can't feel. Yeah. And men just resort to these things. And it was quite funny. I was doing a corporate talk one day, and I mentioned those 5 things, and the CEO came up to me afterwards. He says, "You made me laugh." I said, "Why?" He says, "When you said sports," I burst out laughing. I said, "Why?" He says, "No, man, I'm an Arsenal supporter, and I got so angry because Arsenal sold their best player to Liverpool. I mean, yeah, they got a lot of money and everything, but why would you sell your best player to Liverpool? I mean, Liverpool, of all people." He says, and I got so freaked out and so angry about it. And I told my wife this, and she just laughed at me. She says, "Why don't you get so emotional about things around the house?" And he said to me, "I just realized something." He says that my EQ is such that I don't feel that I can be vulnerable in front of my wife and my children. And a lot of men feel that way, right? A lot of women want men to be vulnerable, but when they do show up vulnerable, they get scared and they want to run away, right? They go like, "Wow, I can't trust this guy to be my protector and my provider anymore because he's being vulnerable." Sorry. But they don't realize that a vulnerable man who's in touch with his emotions is a much safer man. And that sorry, that is the sort of guy that you want to have in your life. So he then realized, instead of now plowing all his emotions into the sports team that nobody really cares about. I mean, who sorry, who gives a continental about Arsenal or Liverpool for that matter? But that was his safe space where he was able to get out that anger and that sadness and that all those emotions that he felt he couldn't do with his family. So yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. The masculinity is interpreted or misunderstood in different ways, especially nowadays. So some people take it in a wrong approach, or they have a wrong mindset, I would say. But lastly, Martin, if listeners want to remember only one message from this conversation, what would you want it to be?
It's gonna be tell your story. I mean, I can't, after all of that go, "Oh, just keep quiet about it." Tell your story. If you've been through pain, find somebody that you can talk to, find somebody that you can trust, and just tell your story. I mean, it's just the incredible healing that comes from being able to tell your story is just life changing, absolutely life changing, and in such profound ways. So if you're going through life and you feel, well, is this all that there is to life? Is this what life is about? I'm not enjoying it. I'm depressed. I'm upset. I'm angry. I'm not in. I hate what I do. It's like I don't feel lovable. I don't feel good enough. I don't feel. We all have a certain amount of imposter syndrome, and that's fine. I mean, that's great because that drives us on to achieve better and bigger, right? But if you kind of avoiding life because you don't want to face things, then find somebody to talk to and get honest. You know what? Talk about that teacher that you slept with when you were 12 or 13 years old or 14 years old. Talk about that guy that stuck his hand down your pants when you were a 14-year-old teenager. Talk about those things. Those are the things that make the biggest difference in your life. And it's when you talk about the tough stuff that your growth truly begins. And if you think about it, I mean, through life, where do we grow the most? Where do we learn the most? It's through pain, right? Heartbreak with a girlfriend. So what did we learn from that? Well, from that I learned that I shouldn't date a girl who has X, Y, Z factors in her life. And when she presents this or that, then I know the next time I get involved with a girl, she brings those things to the party, I leave. Um, right from birth, we learn through pain. We crawling and crawling, get sore on the knees, and then we start walking and we lose our balance and fall, and that's sore. And then your brain goes, well, then keep your balance. So you keep your balance. And one day you walk under the table, the next day you walk under the table, you bump your head because you grew overnight, right? So now your brain says to you, well, that's sore. So instead of just looking at the floor and trying to walk, we need to look up and see if we're going to walk into anything. So you learn, you learn that things that are red generally are hot, and you don't put your hand on it. And why did you learn that? Because you put your hand on it. So the painful lessons are the ones that we remember the most, right? But that's the same in healing. The painful stories are the one that help us grow the most. So I encourage people, tell your story, but especially tell those painful stories.
Absolutely, absolutely. So every time you share your story, especially those painful stories, not only you you heal yourself at the same time, give permission to other people to share their stories. So it's a chain reaction, I would say. So it can help other people, and then somebody else can
Totally.
listen their story, and then they can connect with their story.
Yeah,
It's
totally.
basically the connection. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot, Martin. It's absolutely wonderful to have you. At the same time, I just want to remind our viewers that I already displayed the contact details, social media handles, links. At the same time, the book Pumpkin Van. So it's you can go and check it out. So please keep in touch. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you, Martin, once again
Thank
for
you.
joining and sharing your life journey. Thank you.
It was awesome. Thanks, Sivam. Thanks for taking the time and the invite. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Cool,
Keep
man.
up your good work, your support, very much needed, as you said. It is very important. A lot of areas we cover today, so people can take at least one or two, even it's
I hope
fine.
so.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thanks.
One request, guys, so listeners, so when you are watching this episode, listening and hearing, please share with other people. So this way you can, um, you know, share this message with other people. So we can reach out more people at the same time. They can get this message across. All right. Thanks a lot. Take care. See you next time.